So now I'm going to introduce the Vice Chairperson, Supervisor Linda Puglisi.
Thank you so much, Mayor. Appreciate your excellent partnership along with our other partner, Superintendent Joe Hochreiter, and all the members of this board and panel, members of the community, and all participants. So it has been a journey since January 9th, 2017. Who remembers? When we first heard the announcement by the governor and the then CEO of Entergy that the nuclear plants would be closing April 2020, and then the next one April 21. So it's been a research paper. It has been a journey. As the mayor said, we are in this together. We will continue to do so. People have differences of opinion, but we have one goal, and the goal is to make sure everything is done safely, protect the environment, try to chip away at the loss of revenues. That's going to happen to all of us. Jobs, new skilled jobs are critical for all of us. The reclamation of the land, and of course the storage of the radioactive spent fuel rods at the site. So those are some of our issues, concerns, tasks ahead of us, and we have been doing a lot of work. Since then, we've had a local task force that's met regularly with members of the community and chairing it together. We're members of the New York State Task Force as well. We do have another state and local task force meeting coming up, Teresa, on January 30th, 7 p.m. at the Cortland Town Hall. Open meeting, of course, so we invite you all to be there as well. It's taped, so you can watch it, and it will be streamed, of course. We've had speakers. The list is endless to say tonight, but we've been to Albany, we've been to editorial boards, you've been to forums out of the state.
In Vermont, yeah.
In Vermont, I was going to say out of the country, but no, out of the state, doing your work for us. We've been trying to disseminate information to the best of our ability to our community, and will continue to do so. Councilman, now my deputy supervisor, Richard Becker, is a member of all the boards. So thank you, Richard. And we report back to our Cortland Town Board, of course. Judy Peterson, who's secretary in my office, she takes the minutes, does an excellent job. Thank you, Judy. Yes, we can applaud. So.
Yeah.
It's not easy. For those of us who have taken minutes over the years, that's not an easy task, that is for sure. I had a 2-hour meeting today with George Oros. He's the Town of Cortland's Economic Development Advisor. And so we are working as hard as we can to once again chip away at the loss of revenue when the formula ends 2025, I think it is, when we don't get that revenue, right? So, delighted about the website, Mayor, thank you so much. And I think those are my comments for now, but I would like to echo what you said. Civility is critical, decorum, orderly. That's how we operate, and we really appreciate all of your cooperation. Once again, people are entitled to have differences of opinions, and as we go forward, they will continue to do so. That is what our democracy is all about, and we will listen, work together, and do our best. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor. Joe, what I'm going to do now is go around the room, and I want all the panel members to introduce themselves.
Good evening. Joseph Hochreiter, Superintendent of the Hendrick Hudson School District.
Richard Bunton, Deputy Mayor Buchanan. Rich Becker, Councilman, Town of Cortland.
Hi there, Pete Harcum, New York State Senate, 40th District.
John O'Mara, I'm an engineer, 30 years with the Department of Environmental Conservation, retired, and I got suckered into this.
And welcome.
Oh, boy, did I.
Pete Lauren, I'm the Fort County Coordinator for you.
Nick Longo, I work for Rockland County in the Emergency Services Office. George Rose, Economic Development Consultant for the Town of Portland.
Eileen Absinger, resident of Buchanan.
Colin Smith, County Legislator, District 1.
Amanda Jo Green, Environmental Director, Hudson River Slough Clearwater.
Catherine Borgia, County Legislator, District 9.
Hudson Valley Gateway Chamber of Commerce, sitting in for President Debbie Malone.
Don Dwyer, Montrose Resident Representative.
Sandy Galiff, New York State Assemblywoman.
Dennis Malice, President of Montrose Business Association, representing all the local businesses in the area, kind of the eyes and ears of the businesses that will be affected with this shutdown. Thank you.
Good evening, Tony Vitale, Site Vice President, Indian Point Energy Center.
Mike Toomey, Senior Vice President, Entergy.
Joe Delmar, Senior Director of Government Affairs and Communications for Holtec International.
All right, thank you. We have a diverse group here. We have a very good group here. Also in the audience this evening are Village of Buchanan Board Trustees, Nick Zachary, Cheech Pasquale, and Dwayne Jackson. Thank you. First order of business is the approval of minutes for the June 13th, 2019 meeting. On a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Second? Second. On a question? All in favor? Aye. Approved. Okay. We're going to have, the next item is an update from Entergy.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening. Back in 2017, January, on the same day that the shutdown of the Indian Point Energy Center was announced, Entergy Corporation committed that any qualified employee willing to relocate will be able to have a job with Entergy. And we committed that in the gap year, which is the year between Unit 2 ceasing operation, waiting for Unit 3 to finish its operation in the following year, that there would be no reductions in headcount. That's what we call the gap year. And I'm here to tell you that we have been working very hard as a corporation to keep that promise. It started back in June with a job fair where representatives from all areas of our corporation visited Indian Point. Employees interested in transferring brought their families to site and had an opportunity to ask questions and see what different locations and different job opportunities were like. We also continue to have the opportunity to send our employees and their families to check out other work locations within the corporation. I'm here to tell you this evening, approximately 100 employees will be leaving Indian Point once Unit 2 shuts down towards the end of May. About a 50-50 split to those that will be leaving the company altogether, and about 50% will be relocating elsewhere within the Entergy Corporation, mostly to other nuclear facilities in our fleet or to the corporate office supporting nuclear, but also some are relocating outside of nuclear. New York State Department of Labor has been very active and very supportive of Indian Point employees. They have been on site numerous occasions. In fact, they were here last week, and we have future schedules for them to be on site. They are helping our employees that wish to remain in New York with job opportunities, resume writing, use of LinkedIn, networking, interviewing techniques, etc. As of last week, over 60 employees have signed up and are regularly receiving coaching, counseling, and networking opportunities to further their employment in the state of New York. But I will make a comment that most importantly, my role is the safe operation of the Indian Point Energy Center and protecting the health and safety of the public. And we are always, as workers and nuclear professionals, we are focused on our day-to-day roles and responsibilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Good to hear that. Good to hear that we're finding jobs. You guys are finding jobs for people. That's very critical since there's 1,000 jobs that will be lost with the closure of Indian Point. Also, I'm going to add something onto the agenda. Senator Harkin would like to do a brief update also.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you very much for your leadership through these what will be very challenging times, and you, Madam Supervisor, as well. This is tough stuff. The two of you are taking this head on, and I really commend you. Also want to thank the Entergy team for your work and trying to place workers elsewhere in the corporation. That's important. Just wanted to give a quick update. Assemblywoman Galiff and I have a bill that was passed by both the Assembly and the Senate aimed at giving some protection to some of the workers at the plant. We did it in conjunction with the unions representing the workforce, both who are direct employees and subcontract employees. The legislation said two things. One, that when Holtec comes on, they would be required to hire from the existing labor pool before they went outside unless there were special skill sets needed. And the second piece said it would be a prevailing wage site so that anyone who worked there would essentially be paid what they've been paid or in proximity. So that legislation is on the governor's desk. He responded with chapter amendments, which are essentially technical revisions. Those were unsatisfactory to both Sandy, myself, and the unions. So our councils are working on alternative language to get back to the governor's office. We've got about 3 more weeks, no, 2.5. Yeah, 2.5 weeks, which is an eternity in legislative time. But we just wanted to give you an update on that it is on the governor's desk. Council for both houses are in negotiations with them over potential chapter amendments.
Okay, great. Thank you, Senator Harkin and Assemblywoman Galiff. Thank you for your support of the community and also for the employees there. We appreciate it. Okay, now we have the presentation from Holtec International. Joe Delmar is the Senior Director of Government Affairs and Communications. And Joe, we're looking forward to your presentation.
All right, thank you. First, I'd like to start out and thank Mayor Knickerbocker, Supervisor Puglisi, and the panel for the opportunity to come and speak here tonight. Before we get started, I just want to talk a little, explain who I am and my role at Holtec. I joined Holtec in the summer of last year. Prior to joining Holtec, I worked for PSEG, which is the largest utility company in New Jersey. I spent 12 years there leading the company's communications and government affairs outreach program for the Salem and Hope Creek nuclear plants, which are located all the way at the other end of the state. In that role, worked with the local community, with elected officials, sat on a lot of local community boards from the Chamber of Commerce, the Community College Foundation, and other organizations like that. Played a very active role. I also like to say that nuclear power runs through my blood. My father was a union pipe fitter. He helped build several of the nuclear power plants in the Philadelphia region. Also worked countless refueling outages I remember when I was growing up. Before I left PSEG, the last major project I was involved with was trying to keep Salem and Hope Creek open. Just like Indian Point, they were facing financial challenges, the competitive market with the pressure from natural gas. And in my role, I work closely with the local community to put pressure on the legislature, but also the governor to get a zero emission credit approved. Luckily, we were fortunate to be able to do that, but it was a very challenging experience. People that I'd worked closely with, employees, the concern and anxiety that existed. Again, we were fortunate to keep the plant open. That concern and anxiety is what you're going through today, so I can relate to that. And it's an unfortunate situation that the plants will be closing. But you do have Holtec's commitment that we will be a good neighbor throughout the decommissioning process, and you also have my personal commitment throughout this entire process. Going to be seeing a lot more of me in the months and weeks ahead. So, Just an overview of my presentation, give a high-level overview of Holtec itself, touch on the proposed sales agreement. I know a lot of people are familiar with it, but just want to remind everyone the important aspects of that. Also talk about Holtec's decommissioning organization and our approach on how we go through the process. Mayor Knickerbocker touched on the PSDAR, or the report. We love acronyms, so I'll probably be using PSDAR. And I'll touch on the major components of that document, which are listed there. And then also talk finally about the community benefits to Holtec's decommissioning process. Holtec is committed to the nuclear industry. When a lot of companies are exiting the nuclear industry or moving manufacturing facilities overseas, we're actually expanding our outreach in the nuclear industry. A lot of research and development that's self-funded. We'll talk about some of those programs shortly. And building manufacturing facilities in the United States. A picture there of our state-of-the-art manufacturing facility that opened in Camden, New Jersey about 3-4 years ago. We are the largest U.S. exporter for capital equipment serving the nuclear power industry. Looking at our financial strength, in addition to our safety, quality assurance, and protection of the environment, the company is over 30 years old. We have no history of long-term debt, financially strong and self-financed R&D. We've delivered approximately $4 billion in products, and looking out into the future, we have contracts in place to provide another $5 billion in products to the nuclear power industry.
We have now County Executive George Latimer. Thank you, George.
This is a hard one.
Thank you. I'll continue. Our core business activities, the major aspects of our business really revolve around the cycle of life of supporting the nuclear industry, from operating plants to decommissioning, developing new nuclear technology, as well as energy battery storage. Our first core business is what a lot of people are familiar when they hear the name Holtec in the industry, is in regards to safe and secure used nuclear fuel storage. Dr. Singh, who is our founder, he, many years ago, about over 3 decades ago, developed technology that allowed expansion of space to store spent fuel within the spent fuel pools. Taking that a step further, developed the technology for the dry cask storage, as well as some of the materials that we use to construct those type of canisters. We're going to talk a lot tonight about the decommissioning of retired nuclear power plants. One of the other things moving forward, which is a concern that was mentioned earlier, is what happens to the spent nuclear fuel. The Federal Department of Energy has a commitment to take the spent nuclear fuel from Indian Point and other operating nuclear power reactors in the United States, as well as plants that have closed and decommissioned. The spent fuel remains there. One of the things that we are in the process of doing is licensing and developing a consolidated interim storage facility called High Store, located out in the New Mexico desert. And that'll allow us to store the spent nuclear fuel from Indian Point and other nuclear plants in one central location and be able to do that. You'll probably hear a lot of information regarding this facility in the next 2 to 3 months. We are going through the licensing process with the NRC, and by the end of the first quarter, at the end of March, we expect to receive the draft environmental impact statement from the NRC on that, and that'll open a series of public meetings out in New Mexico. Holtec is also in the process of developing a small modular nuclear reactor, very small in comparison to the size of Indian Point. It's only about 160 megawatts. And again, this is something that's self-financed through our research and development. We began developing this process about 10 years ago. The market that we see for it is primarily overseas, and we do have an agreement in place to provide the first 6 SMRs to the Ukraine. And that's probably about 6-7 years away as we go through the licensing process in Canada. We're not licensing it here in the United States. And then finally, the newest piece of our business model is battery energy storage. Taking what's out there for renewables, one of the major aspects and challenges of renewables is you can't store the wind energy, can't store the solar energy. Battery energy storage, there's a company called EOS, also based in New Jersey, that we're partnering with to expand that effort, and also are ramping up manufacturing facility out at our facility outside of Pittsburgh. Holtec's worldwide dry storage technology, you can see this map here. We supply dry cask storage technology around the world. 118 nuclear power plants. There's 440 around the world, so more than 25% use Holtec's dry cask storage technology. This speaks to the wide acceptance across the industry to the technology that we've been able to develop. Looking at the map, there's 13 different countries here that have nuclear power plants. What I'd also like to point out is that also means that we are regulated by 13 different countries. I'm not aware of any other company out there that has a product or service that is as heavily regulated as Holtec. I'm sure there are, but it's heavily regulated, around the world. I just want to touch on the proposed sales agreement. Holtec is not the current owner. Entergy remains the owner. April 16th of last year, we announced an agreement where Entergy would sell the subsidiaries that own all 3 units to Holtec for decommissioning. As part of the transaction, it would include the transfer of the NRC licenses, the spent fuel, as well as the decommissioning liabilities and the nuclear decommissioning trust funds. The proposed sale would not become effective until Unit 3 has shut down in the second quarter of next year, and the plant has been permanently defueled with the fuel moved into the spent fuel pool. I also want to touch on that on November 22nd, along with Entergy, we did file a license transfer application to transfer the license from Entergy to Holtec as part of the transaction. Based on the project plan, we did receive notification from the NRC a couple weeks ago that they have completed their acceptance review and will begin formally reviewing the application. And we expect to hopefully receive NRC approval on the license transfer early next year. In addition to NRC regulatory approval, we will also be reaching out to the Public Service Commission. We also filed with them. Because the Indian Point units will no longer be operating and generating electricity when the transaction goes through, Entergy and Holtec believe that the Indian Point plants are no longer subject to PSC jurisdiction, and that would be consistent with precedent that they'd sent previously. However, if they determine that they need to review it, we are going to ask them to approve the transaction in the public interest. We'll also be working closely with the State Department of Environmental Conservation in terms of environmental impacts, in addition to any federal regulatory requirements. Just want to talk now about Holtec and our decommissioning organization and our approach to decommissioning overall. Answer a lot of questions, hopefully. Holtec International is our parent company. I talked a little about that. We formed Holtec Decommissioning International. This is a wholly owned subsidiary of Holtec International to focus solely on the safe and efficient decommissioning of shut down nuclear power plants. HDI uses what is called a fleet approach to decommissioning. It's very similar to the fleet process that Entergy uses or Exelon or other nuclear plants use for their operating plants. By using a fleet model, you're able to share procedures and processes, look for opportunities to improve safety and productivity as well. HDI will be holder of the NRC license and will also be the holder of liability associated to decommissioning. Also, HDI will be managing and controlling the nuclear decommissioning trust funds for all 3 units. The other organization that encompasses what we are doing for decommissioning is Comprehensive Decommissioning International, and they will be the boots on the ground doing the decommissioning work, reporting to HDI. And this is a joint venture with S&C Lavalin, and between the 2 companies, we have 60 years of experience in spent fuel management, decommissioning, and site remediation and restoration. The decommissioning experience includes direct experience at plants like Big Rock Point in Michigan, Zion in Illinois, as well as the fleet of Magnot's reactors used in the United Kingdom, as well as several research reactors in Canada. Our decommissioning approach, under our model, work activities are going to begin as soon as possible. If Entergy were to pursue decommissioning and choose the safe store option under the NRC regulations, they could wait a maximum of 60 years to complete decommissioning. And the plant would sit idle, jobs would be lost, and there'd be very little activity after shutdown that'd be put off for decades. Our project goal is to complete partial site release within 15 years, but it could be as early as 12 years, which is what the current schedule and cost estimate are based on. Holtec's approach to decommissioning, I believe, runs parallel to what the community is looking to do. We're going to maintain and create jobs now versus later. We're also going to be, hopefully, with the completing decommissioning earlier, be able to repurpose and bring in additional tax revenue decades sooner. Going to get into the meat of our discussion tonight, and that is the PSDAR. Holtec filed this right before the holidays on December 19th. We'd also like to point out that we will also be submitting to the NRC a request for an exemption to use the nuclear decommissioning trust funds for spent fuel management and site restoration activities. This is allowed under the NRC regulations and has been done at other decommissioning sites. There's requirements and guidance for the PSDAR as noted there. We also looked at other submittals that have been submitted over the years. And I also want to point out that the PSDAR is a living document that outlines the current planned decommissioning activities. As we go through the process and things change, the PSDAR will be updated. On the next couple of slides, I'm going to focus on the 4 major sections that you see listed there that make up the PSDAR. The planned decommissioning activities goes through several different phases. Pre-decommissioning planning and preparation. This is going to take place in preparation for decommissioning regardless of who the owner is. This is Entergy, Holtec, or if it were to be another organization. This includes developing a schedule for shutdown as well as the schedule for spent fuel management. Includes any licensing and permitting actions that may be needed to move the plant from an operating state to a decommissioning state. And another important component is stakeholder outreach, which is one of the reasons I'm here tonight and will be here a lot moving forward in the future. Plant deactivation is the next phase. And again, activities associated with termination of operations. This includes isolating power and other systems that are no longer needed, that were needed for operating the plant but not needed for decommissioning the plant. Safe storage operations. The fuel movement from the spent fuel pools to the existing on-site dry fuel storage facility. Holtec has supported spent fuel management at Indian Point for nearly 3 decades, from the spent fuel pool to the dry cask storage. And if for some reason the transaction were not to close, we would still remain a partner with Entergy in providing spent fuel management services. That's a separate contract. If something were to happen, we would still remain in that role. The next phase is where you're going to see a lot of activity in terms of dismantling, demolition, and removal of building materials and structures from the plant site as we begin to clear the area off. When I mentioned partial site release in that 12-15 year time frame, we can't do a full site release due to the spent fuel storage area. That needs to remain intact until the Department of Energy takes that. So the ongoing ISFSI is the Independent Spent Fuel Storage Installation. I always get tested on that acronym, but the dry cask storage area, that will remain under high security by highly trained security professionals, similar to what's used at the plant now. And the fuel will remain on site until the Department of Energy takes ownership or it's moved to an interim interim storage facility located elsewhere. Here's the eye chart. This is the current schedule of activities. It is a lot easier to read in the actual document if anyone's gone through that. It is figure 3.1 if you want to go back and look at that. It's difficult to read, so if I could, I just want to move on to the next slide, which is a higher level overview of that schedule. Again, the chart shows the major milestones that will take place throughout the decommissioning process. And this will lead us to the partial site release within the 15 years. It could be as early as 12 years, and again, the schedule and the cost estimate are based on that. Holtec has the ability and the option, hopefully, that ISFSI-only operation, that target end date of 2062 in the schedule moves up to the left considerably with the ability to license and have high store up and operational in New Mexico. The decommissioning cost estimate, these are the major aspects that make up the cost, from license termination, spent fuel management, and site restoration activities. Looking at those dollar figures there, I have 2 communications degrees. Math is definitely not my strong point. The total estimate for throughout the decommissioning process, the cost is estimated at $2.3 billion. The value of the decommissioning trust funds for all 3 units as of October 31st of last year is $2.1 billion. So I just want to assure everyone that over the period of time of decommissioning, there will be growth through the decommissioning trust fund. The money from the trust fund is invested, and we are allowed under the NRC guidelines to assume a very conservative 2% real rate of return. And that 2% real rate of return, that takes into account inflation, other increased cost along the way. So that 2% minimum is only allowed what we're allowed to assume in the PSDAR document. Looking at how the fund has grown over the years, we're confident that the fund will continue to grow. I just want to put it in a perspective. I look at my 401k from last year. That grew at about 13%. My wife and I, we have a money market account for our everyday savings. That has a 2% rate of return. So again, it's very conservative to make sure that the fund does not lose value, but the opportunities are there for the fund to grow as well. The trust funds are heavily scrutinized by the NRC. And again, Holtec Decommissioning International will be the one managing and controlling the costs from the decommissioning trust funds. We are required to submit an annual report to the NRC outlining the costs that we are incurring and taking from the trust funds throughout the process. If the NRC believed at any point that there was not sufficient funding available, they could take appropriate action, and that could include telling us that we need to stop decommissioning activities that would allow the fund to continue to grow, or they could require Holtec to put additional funding into the decommissioning trust fund. This will not fall on the public. This will not fall on ratepayers. It will be Holtec's obligation. And again, I just want to reinforce that the funds will grow over that decommissioning period. The final major section of the PSDAR relates to environmental impacts. There are several regulatory sets of guidelines from the NRC that we must follow that evaluate the potentially impacted areas that are listed there. Environmental issues are not my level of expertise, and would welcome the opportunity to come before the panel in the future and bring some of our subject matter experts to talk in more detail about this topic. Finally, I just want to talk about Holtec's approach and how it benefits the community. It was touched on earlier. I know there's calls for legislation, but also some of the things that Tony touched on. We're going to be maintaining and creating jobs now by beginning decommission as soon as possible. As part of the sales transaction with Entergy, we have agreed any employees from Entergy working in Point at the time of the transaction, they will move over to join our decommissioning team, and we approximate just over 300 people will be doing that. We will honor the existing collective bargaining agreements with the union, and we also will be using local people through the local labor halls. We have a national labor agreement in place working through the National Laborers Organization that funnels down through the specialty trades. So if there's a need for pipe fitters, electricians, for the variety of specialty trades, they will be called upon to support decommissioning throughout the process. In terms of tax revenue, we have committed, we will honor the existing pilot agreements that Entergy has in place. And more importantly, we're also committed to working with the local community leadership. We've touched on some preliminary conversations on what we can do to repurpose that site and get tax revenue in there as soon as possible to lessen the impact on the local community. I just want to make some closing comments and touch on a couple of the key points again. The decommissioning process, whether Entergy or Holtec were to do decommissioning, I mentioned that 12, 15-year time frame. It would remain the same regardless of who that company or organization is. Under Holtec, one of the main differences with our plan to what Entergy may have proposed or another company is that we would begin the decommissioning process decades sooner. And again, we want to do that within the 12, 15-year time frame. And again, committed to working with the local community. I'll be up here on the 30th also talking to the state task force and welcome the opportunity to work closely with you moving forward. I just want to thank Mayor Knickerbocker, Supervisor Puglisi, and the panel for the opportunity to speak here tonight.
All right, thank you, Joe. I think you hit on a lot of the questions and a lot of good points. One of them I know has been an issue was the trust fund. Looking through the report, we see it's a $2.3 billion decommissioning project, and we see that there's a shortage. But I'm glad you explained what that was, and I'm especially, with the NRC, that they can stop the project if they feel that there's not enough money to continue the project. So that's good to know. Or Holtec has to put in additional funds. So that's kind of a concern for all of us. Also, one of the other big concerns in the community is, of course, releasing some of the property. And of course, we all understand the property that has to be decommissioned will not be part of that. So, but we are concerned about the outlying areas. I know the state had done a, with DL English, they had done a study of, the different parts of the site. So of course, we all understand that the village and the town and all the taxpayers in the area are quite interested in possibly having some of that property released, and so that we could help our tax base. I have several other questions, but you know what? I'm going to defer to our board. Anybody that has any questions? Yes, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Joe. Thanks for coming. Thanks for the presentation. I look forward to working with you. I know my office and your office have been working to set up a time, so I'll save the bulk of my questions. But one thing jumped out at me. We've been talking about the subject of jobs and trying to retain as many folks and the local folks. And then when it came to security officers, you said they would be similar to what's there now. You didn't say the same security officers who are there now. And that kind of jumped out at me in light of what you were saying earlier about trying to preserve jobs and local jobs.
I would just like to clarify, they would be the same security officers that are working there today, that as long as they work with the organization, they would be the same security officers that would be overseeing its facility operations, spent fuel storage operations. So.
All right, thank you. And look forward to our in-depth conversation in person. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sure.
I just have a couple, Teresa.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. Yes, thank you for the presentation. It was in-depth. We appreciate it. The 300 jobs, approximately 1/3 will be continuing with you. Is that what you said?
We'll inherit those 300 employees, and as the decommissioning process goes up and down at different phases, that number will change regarding, Holtec-related employment through CDI or also through the trade unions. It'll be hundreds at different times. Depending what the needs are, it'll fluctuate in terms of specialty.
Thank you. I'm just trying to get at, are they going to remain as permanent employees in a transfer from Entergy to Holtec, or are they going to be part-timers?
They will be full-time employees once the transaction completes.
You'll continue to use local contractors when needed?
Yes, we are committed to working with the local community, utilizing local resources.
Okay, let me move on to something else. How will you be, you're just going to dismantle one plant at a time, transfer the rods one plant at a time, and how long does that transfer of those rods take?
The transfer of the fuel from the spent fuel pools into the dry cask storage, that'll be done prior to the sale acquisition by Holtec. That'll be completed over a several week period once the plant's shut down. I don't have the schedule in front of me on that, but that's something that Entergy will be the lead for, and we'll be supporting those activities. But that'll be completed. That'll be completed over several weeks once the plant is shut down.
And what's the number? Do you have the number off the top of your head? Or?
I do not. We can get those numbers for you though.
Okay, thereabouts. Do you have?
I do not have that. I don't want to misspeak. But
Mr. Toomey, does he have that?
No, I don't have that, but I do want to clarify one thing, just in case people in the audience are wondering. Joe talked about the idea that there would be about roughly 300 employees at Indian Point at the time that the transaction is projected to close, which would be, second or third quarter of 2021. Today, we have a little less than 900 employees at the site. And I just want to make sure everybody understands the process. As we shut the units down, as we defuel the reactors, Entergy is reducing the employees at the site from around 900 to around 300. And that happens no matter what. That happens whether there's a transaction or whether there's no transaction. By spring 2021, there will only be about 300 employees who work for Entergy at Indian Point. And what's going to happen if the transaction goes through is that every one of those 300 employees will move over and become Holtec employees on that day. But the drawdown from 900 to 300, that's going to happen under our watch, and that happens irrespective of whether there's any transaction. Just in case anybody was confused about that.
I just have two quick questions, Mayor, then we'll turn it over to others. I appreciate it. You mentioned the reuse of the property. That's really on our minds. The corner areas that the DL English defined in their report that was done by the PSC. Is it on?
It's a little louder. It's on.
Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, so we're concerned about the reuse of the property. It's about 60 acres out of the 240 acres, if I recall, from the DL English report, the corner, basically the corner areas. So last time I asked Holtec, they said they would consider, entertain, review, and get back to us to see if you won't need those areas for the storage and for the decommissioning. So we are very interested in that answer, sir. My other question is, the NRCs, what is their role in monitoring, overseeing the decommissioning? They have people there on the ground to inspect, monitor the decommissioning. Is that correct?
Correct. The NRC will have people on the plant site. I'd also like to point out that once the fuel is moved from the spent fuel pool into the dry cask storage area, that removes just over 95% of radioactive material from the plant itself. So it technically turns into an industrial demolition project, similar to that you would see with other buildings on that. So. And
I realize you're not the owner yet, but we would love to see a security plan, an overall security plan, when you can give that to us. And also, the environment is very important to us all. So there's 33 wells on the 240 acres, if I recall correctly. We've sat through many, many years of meetings with the NRC and Entergy, Con Ed before them on the wells. So we'd love to see an environmental plan on the protection of those wells, and of course, it abuts the Hudson River. So thank you for listening to me.
Supervisor Polisi, I just want to clarify on the security aspect. Welcome the opportunity to talk more detail about security. That is a very top secret level of information that we will tell you as much information as we can under the NRC guidelines to ensure that you understand
right.
that, that it will be safe. But
I'm not asking for the plan of where they're going to be situated. I just want to know a general plan of security.
We can definitely do that.
Okay, thanks.
Good, perfect. We'll go down this way.
Yes, I have two questions. Is there any thought to having the local community be involved in the overseeing of the actual closure, where we may have our own engineer and accountants to be looking at what's going on, or is that being considered at all?
That's not something that we've considered. I know the NRC goes through an extensive review process. I know we're also having discussions with the Public Service Commission, looking at some of those aspects.
Okay, the second question was that in your background, and you may not be able to answer this, it may be more like entity, because in 2008, the remaining 160 spent fuel assemblies from Indian Point 1 previously were shipped to West Valley Reprocessing Plant in upstate New York. How there's a lot of concern in the community about if the spent nuclear fuel is taken off the property, that how is it going to be transported to where you have your other areas down in Texas. So I would like to know, if maybe Entergy knows, how was these 160 spent fuel, how were they transported?
I don't have the details on that. We can follow up and find out what the information is about that.
And then would the whole tech be entertaining transporting them via barge and rail, or haven't decided that yet?
The decision on how spent fuel would be removed off-site is yet to be determined. That would really depend on where the final location, be an interim or permanent storage facility. Yucca Mountain's still out there, though I don't believe that's going to happen. It would all depend on the actual location and working with the Department of Energy, as well as the local community on what is the safest and most efficient way to get the fuel off-site, via truck, via barge, to a rail system that could take it to whatever location, things like that. That's well into the future to be determined once the location's identified.
Thank you.
My question is actually a follow-up to Mr. Fusion's, which is, I thought federal law prohibited the movement of nuclear material on highways and trains. Am I misinformed?
At this time, we can't remove the fuel off-site, so if it were to be, moved off-site in the future, once a repository is built, temporary or permanent, the regulations would need to be looked at in terms of, I'm not sure what the actual regulation is today, but if it needs to be changed to allow that to happen, it would have, need to occur.
I know there is a 2002 report from the Department of Energy. It cost over $1 billion to do this report, and it dealt with all the nuclear power plants in the country on how that fuel would be moved eventually. And you can access that, and that's where I had mentioned years ago I was at one of MANA's meetings, and one of the thoughts were the heavy components would leave on a barge and go down the Hudson River. But that's, that's until we get a final repository, that's in the future. But that will be a huge topic of discussion when that time comes.
And when that time comes, we'll definitely keep the local community informed on how we're going to do those things.
George Rose had a question.
Yeah, you showed that the decommissioning trust fund was at $2.18 billion as of, I think,
Oh, yeah, George, if you could grab a mic. Okay, thank you.
Wow. You mentioned that the decommissioning trust fund was at $2.18 billion as of, it looks like the third quarter of
October 31st.
Correct.
Number.
Doesn't Entergy have an obligation to continue to fund that up until at least the closing, or?
The trust fund, we're holding the trust fund.
So you don't make
until the
deposits,
closing.
there's no deposits every year, it's just?
No,
okay.
that fund has been growing through fund performance, investment performance. That date, the amount on his slide was as of October 31st. We will be updating the amount, I think in March. We'll provide another update of what it looked like at the end of the year.
Okay.
And then we typically provide those updates quarterly. But that fund we expect it to continue to grow. In fact, I can't tell you the amount because it's got to be run through our SEC filing material. But the amount as of 12/31 was more than the amount in 10/31/19.
It just, to me, it'd be better if the the 2.38 match the 2.38.
I totally agree with you,
At the
sir.
time of
I agree
closing.
with you.
Is there any way that we can get that information after it's available to the public, what the dollar amount is again?
Yeah, we make that information public.
All right, thank you. Yep, it's you, Mike.
We make that information public on a quarterly basis, and we can provide that to the town and to this panel once it becomes public. That's no problem at all.
All right, great, thank you, appreciate that. John?
Probably a naive question. I'm an engineer, not an accountant. You put up there $2.1 billion in a trust fund. Over 50% of that was to put under a title license termination. I'm curious what that includes. That probably does, probably because I'm naive, it's probably operating the plant during that time frame, but.
The license termination includes those activities related to demolition and dismantling and things like that, yes.
That confused me
No.
before I was in naive. I just wanted to clear
No.
up my head.
Yeah,
Thank
none
you.
of that money is spent on operating the
Yeah, I know
plant
that.
between now
Yeah,
and
the kind
shutdown.
of- the headline on that is gonna scare some people, I see.
That's what the NRC refers to it as license. The NRC refers to it as license termination, meaning you're terminating
The whole
the
plant.
license
Yeah, okay.
with the NRC that under which the plant operated, and you do that by decommissioning
It's
it,
all
demolishing,
operational. Okay.
and getting to a stage where it's no longer considered an operating plant.
Thank you.
Elaine?
I have a question about the air quality. When you start to dismantle this, we have an elementary school close by, one in Montrose, but Buchanan. The air quality when you start to dismantle this, what will that be? I know it says it's a low-risk radiation. I read the report. It sounds really great, but I don't trust the government. I don't trust the NRC. I hate to say, I may not trust you either.
No,
You'll have to win the trust of many Buchanan residents. I'm not sure about anybody else. But for those children or the elderly, anybody that has any kind of respiratory or any problems, when that powder is coming off, there was a spray that you also spoke about in that report, water spraying, which should contain that dust. But not all particles are contained, so I'm just curious about that. And I also have a question about your discrete risk. Have you ever had any snafus or weaknesses that you ran across, or any risk that came about that was of a bigger concern to you as the decommissioning company that you could talk about?
First, on the topic of air quality, not my level of expertise, but we can definitely have someone provide more information on that topic for you. In terms of the decommissioning that we're currently doing at Oyster Creek in New Jersey and Pilgrim in Massachusetts, in the past 8 to 12 months that we've been beginning decommissioning operations, we've had no major concerns or issues pop up that we did not anticipate or were not aware of or anything like that. So.
Will the air quality issue be part of the GEIS?
We're not doing an environmental impact statement for this, but the air quality is part that is examined as part of the PSDAR. And again, we can have someone come and talk to that topic.
If I could go back to a question that was asked earlier about the 160 fuel assemblies, I've just gotten clarification. Those were from the Unit 1 plant, which has been shut and not operating since the mid-'70s. And all of that fuel is actually on site at Indian Point in casks. That fuel from Unit 1 was not sent to, that 160 fuel assemblies was not sent to upstate New York.
What was that 160 they're mentioning in this report, the background? I mean, they said it was going to upstate New York.
I think there was other fuel in the 50s and 60s in the 60s and 70s that may have gone to that location. But we had a movement of 160 fuel assemblies. I thought it was the same number, and that's on the cask. We've got that much in casks on site.
You still don't know how that original 160 was transported?
No, that was before our ownership.
Okay.
Con Ed probably can
Okay.
answer that question, or NIPA, depending on which unit it was from, before Entergy became the owner.
Okay.
Colin?
Yes.
Oh, Eileen, did you have another
Yeah, I have
question?
one
I'm
more
sorry.
question. Are you
I'm
a
sorry.
24/7 operation also?
Yes, we are a 24/7 operation.
Is that like 7-Eleven? Just kidding,
Yeah.
just a joke. So thank you for coming out this evening and giving us this update, Mr. Delmar. Again, my name is Colin Smith, County Legislator, District 1. And I actually had I had a couple questions. First, just for clarification purposes, with respect to the trust fund, I know you had said that you're anticipating that the money will be there and that it shouldn't be an issue. But you had mentioned that in the event that you fall short at some point, that Holtec would either basically kind of put in the rest, or that the NRC could stop operations. Under what conditions would that occur?
Based on the funding level in the decommissioning trust fund and the drawdown that we're doing for reimbursement of cost, if they determine that it reaches a level that they don't believe that it could continue to grow conservatively to cover the complete decommissioning costs, they could make that decision at that time to stop, require us to stop, to allow the fund to grow over a period, or require us to put additional funding in.
Oh, okay, thank you. And then just as a follow-up to the question of whether the spent fuel rods ultimately will stay on site or be transported, I know that the plan is to have them removed at some point. But in the event that you run into issues along those lines with respect to being able to get the changes and regulations that would be required, does that impact, or is that going to impact how you proceed at this point with respect to housing, or the plan for housing those fuel rods?
The current schedule that we have developed bases the fuel being removed off-site by 2062 is what the plan is, well into the future. There's talk of a federal repository. Again, Yucca Mountain hasn't happened. There's talk about another location. Also, the interim solution that we're exploring, and other companies also exploring that option as well. We believe that it's a feasible option, and it's something that us, on behalf of the nuclear industry, we have strong support from the industry. I think it would be very valuable for the community here, and we've talked to other communities where our dry cask storage. We've talked to the community around Oyster Creek as well about pushing back on the federal government to get them to move forward and make a decision, because the commitment was, yes, we welcome the plant here in the community. The agreement was never to take the spent fuel and leave it here. The Department of Energy had that commitment. They have not honored that. So hopefully, working together, we can get a solution made available to all of us.
Okay. And another follow-up. You had mentioned with regard to sort of the economic issues surrounding the shutdown. You talked about the pilot agreements that you were going to honor, at least as far as insofar as that is in place. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, you also mentioned that there would be other measures you'd be willing to take or looking to take to kind of offset some of the the loss to the local community, particularly the village of Buchanan, the town of Cortland, and the Hendrick Hudson School District. Is that a conversation that you've had? Is that part of the plan? Are there any specific measures that you anticipate taking in that regard?
And just want to clarify, I did say that we would honor the existing pilot agreements. In terms of moving forward beyond that, we are not the owner yet. But again, that's one of the topics. In addition to future land use, we welcome the opportunity to have further discussions in the future.
Thank you.
Manager Green, Environmental Director for Hudson River Sloop Clearwater. First of all, I want to clarify that Entergy did not put money into the decommissioning fund. That was received when Entergy took over the facility from Con Ed and New York Power Authority. So I just wanted to make that clarification. It has grown through investments over time, but it's just a minor clarification. And I also want to thank Holtec for giving us some really substantial material to review. It makes it real as we're approaching closure and decommissioning, and let people know that you did not have to provide this until 2 years after closure. So I want to acknowledge that. There were a few things in the PSDAR that I considered serious omissions and things that might need to be added. One is there was, I don't believe, any mention of the Algonquin pipeline that's running under the plant. I think it's really important, especially since the state has said that that pipeline might need to be closed during decommissioning if there's heavy equipment on site. So I think that should be covered. Another thing is we're very concerned about the handling of high burnup fuel versus the fuel that was used earlier, and I think that should be addressed. You spoke about security planning, but not emergency planning. And my concern, one of our concerns is that at Oyster Creek, they have no support whatsoever for their emergency planning now that that Holtec is in the process of decommissioning. But as has been well documented, decommissioning is still a dangerous phase, and also there will be radioactive fuel, so-called spent fuel, stored on site. So I think that emergency response, especially for this community, needs to be addressed. I had just a couple other quick questions, and I have 7 pages of questions and comments, and I have copies. I'll be sure that you get them, because this right now is an exploratory process, and I was glad to hear that the document could be amended as needed moving forward. So one of my most serious questions, and Holtec is especially well prepared to answer it, is, you know, what casks and canisters, let me say it the other way, what canisters which hold the fuel assemblies and casks will be used. We know what is in use already, but moving forward, and I raise that question because there's a debate in the industry about thin-walled versus thick-walled, whether the casks, the canisters can or have been inspected, and also there was an incident at San Onofre, reported recently at a decommissioning forum by Rear Admiral Len Herring, who talked about how the canister got scratched when it was being put into the cask, and scratched and gouged, and that can shorten the life of a canister holding very highly radioactive fuel. So I think it would be valuable to be specific about what is planned. Not that that can't change, but I know that many of the people I speak for are hoping that the canisters will be the more robust canisters that are in use in Europe. And my specific question is, are the canisters able to be used for transport, or are they just for storage? And then how do we get from, down the road, when and if there is a facility to move the spent fuel to, how would that occur? Would there need to be an overpack? So that's an actual question.
I am not familiar in the level of detail, the questions you're asking on the dry gas storage containers. That is definitely a topic that we can come back and bring some of our engineering experts that are involved in the design and address a lot of those questions for you.
Okay.
I think that would be an excellent topic to have at one of our other meetings.
more
That's
in
a
depth.
good question, sure, absolutely.
And the last comment I want to make is that given that there could be an accident with spent fuel, I think it's wise to leave whichever remaining fuel pool is most structurally sound intact in case it were needed in the case of an emergency. It's a suggestion. I have, other issues to raise, but I think those are the ones on the top of my head, and I will submit our other comments in writing, and whichever need to be added to a future agenda, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, no, that'd be great.
Definitely do
Put
that.
them in writing manner. That would be helpful.
Yeah. And I think the emergency planning also, that's a discussion we've been having, so that will be a topic of conversation also with the local fire departments, the emergency planning people, and that's a topic that's come up too. Thank you.
So many of my questions have been asked, but I would like to just make an observation. Catherine Borgia, also on the County Board of Legislators, representing the very nearby properties of the plant. So thank you very much. I think this was a very informative presentation, but it feels to me like there's still a lot of looseness in the details of some of the planning, especially some of the contingency planning, a lot of which Mana has talked about. And I think for the community, we'd feel more comfortable knowing that some of the potential contingencies that seem obvious are at least possible, that there was some level of detailed planning. For example, what will happen if you are not able to transport to another facility, and these are going to stay in dry cask storage for a very extended period of time, more than the 40 years you're anticipating. We've been following Yucca Mountain since the 90s, and there doesn't seem to have been any movement on federal repositories. So I think it's I understand from a business planning point of view why you would like that, but I could definitely see there being some obstacles to that, and this fuel being in our community for hundreds of years. So I think we'd just like to see a little bit more of okay, here's a thing that potentially could happen because we've seen it happen in other communities, or because we know the political realities. What's the plans if that were to happen? So I know that Teresa's going to have you back with a whole lot more detail, but I think we'd appreciate that a lot.
No, and I'm not avoiding questions or anything. This was designed to be an overview. I'm not a subject matter expert on a lot of the key topics here, and again, would definitely look to answer those questions moving forward for you.
Linda, can I jump in just for a quick second? George Latimer, Westchester County Executive. Since both Colin and Catherine have spoken, we're going to work between the legislature and our executive team and extend an offer for you to come to White Plains, address the full legislature and our executive team so that we can ask those questions and have other members, your colleagues as well. We'll work it out at a time that's convenient for your schedule. Obviously, it'll be open to our friends and local legislators, state legislators, but there'll be a lot of questions that will be asked by people that don't live in the immediate area. Particularly if there's any kind of traffic that's going to go downriver, which I have doubts about. Other legislators will also want to know that. So we'll extend that invitation. Hopefully, we'll pick a right date, and we'll delve a little more deeply in some of these issues.
Definitely do that.
County Executive, Buchanan hosted last week the Westchester Municipal Association dinner meeting. And of course, as you know, all the communities from the whole county come up to the dinners, and there was a lot of interest, a lot of questions throughout the county, not just our area, about the closure of Indian Point. So that would be very beneficial.
And we'll extend that to all elected officials.
Paul in particular.
We'll give him a seat of honor.
Sandy Galiff, Assembly Member. I just want to go back to the $2.1 billion that we have in the account. How much will it cost to get all of our spent fuel rods out of the pool and into dry cast? How much of that money is going to be used for that purpose?
I don't have that exact dollar figure in front of me. I can get that for you, though, on what the cost estimate is on that specific
Right,
item.
because you're asking for the trust fund to put some of its money into dry cast, which I didn't know that you said the NRC said that is a doable kind of thing? You have to get permission to do it?
We have to get approval from the NRC. It is allowed under the regulations. It's been allowed at other decommissioning sites.
Right. But if you don't have enough money, you know, I'm very concerned about the whole site, that we get it cleaned up and that you don't use it all for spent fuel rod storage.
I understand that concern, and again, that's something that the NRC heavily scrutinizes the trust fund to make sure that enough funding is available, and Holtec would be liable to make sure that, you know, we would be required to put additional funding into the trust fund if needed to cover any decommissioning costs that remain.
So they wouldn't do that until the end of the process?
They would do that throughout the process. We have to submit an annual report that's reviewed by the NRC, and any time when we're submitting an annual report or anywhere along the way, they could recognize that you do not have enough funding available based off your cost estimate to complete the decommissioning work safely. We're going to order you to stop decommissioning work so the fund can grow, or they could require us to add additional funding in.
And where do you get that additional funding through your company? Which
That would
arm?
That would come through our parent company, Holtec International.
Okay. As far as the spent fuel rods, my understanding was that you had to leave them in the pools for about 5 years. Am I right on that? 5 or 7 years? And when I start to see these plans, it seems like it's moving faster than that. Is there a time frame within which they have to be in the spent fuel pools?
I can just share, if I may. We recently went through a transfer of spent fuel to dry cask at Vermont Yankee, and we were able to do that with Holtec in 3.5 years. I think you are recollecting previous discussions that the company has had, and I'll just say that technological improvements have made it possible to move spent nuclear fuel faster, as we did recently at Vermont Yankee. They're in the process of doing it at Pilgrim, and we expect to do it at Indian Point as well.
Okay. I'd just like to add a little on the trust factor. I'm sorry, I just don't have a trust factor with you yet.
Personally.
I don't know whether you're going to, you could say at the last minute, you're going to do 60 years and walk away from us. I tended to think that maybe we're going to have to, if you don't pay in the money, and we may have to do it to complete decommissioning as energy users in the area. That concerns me. I don't know about the job security. You say, yes, you're going to do that. I don't know in 2 years whether the security officers aren't going to be there. I don't really have trust in that. The Algonquin pipeline is a big issue, really needs to be dealt with. So I think, from my perspective, you have a lot of convincing of this community that you are a good company and that we should welcome you in. I may be in the minority here, I don't know, but that's the way I feel. So there've been a lot of negatives about Holtec. So you got to turn them around.
Thank you.
Okay.
Don?
So you said you're going to honor the pilot agreement that's in place. Until when is the first question?
I believe the current pilot agreement extends through 2024. Is that 2025?
The second question is, the lifespan of the radioactive material inside the casks is quite enormous, correct? What's the lifespan of the cask, and what's the plan to replace them? Is there some kind of timetable? Is it just ongoing observance of the condition of the casks? I mean, we're probably talking 50 or 60, 100 years down the road, but I'm not going to be here, but somebody will be here. So it is a concern of the community. And lastly, the technology improvements that have greatly shrunken the time frame to go from wet to dry cask. Sounds great, but it makes me extremely nervous because radioactive material is deadly, and we all have to live here in the proximity to 138 giant casks full of nuclear radiation. We want to make sure it's the safest possible condition in the safest possible container. So anything you could speak to that now or in the future would be helpful.
We can definitely speak to that in the future. I will say, as someone who's worked in the nuclear industry for 13, 14 years now, spent nuclear fuel, it is definitely, a major concern, not just of this community, but other communities. I've stood next to those dry cask storage containers. I've put my hand on those, and they're safe. I've gotten no additional radiation. That's how robust those containers are. But again, we can have experts come in and talk in more detail about
I'm
those.
sorry to jump in, but that's today. I think what we're asking is, what about, what's the degradation factor that's built into a mechanical operation?
Yeah, yes, I understand. And we can definitely talk to that in the future.
That's going to be a huge topic for us when we get into the canisters, and, we'll get into all those details. I've written down notes, so we'll be planning out the meetings for the rest of the years. But there's a lot of interest in that. As we can see, there's a lot of interest in the fund. There's a lot of interest in getting to know you as a business, and, so it's a process, and we'll be working on. But I am very interested in the cask also.
We're just starting.
It's the beginning of a long process here. Does anyone else from the panel have any questions before I turn it over?
Is there a handheld mic?
Yes, we have, Marcus will be walking, so. We have, so now we have a comment period. Could I see a raise of hands of how many people would like to comment? All right, so we're looking about 3 minutes. Marcus will bring the microphone to you, and thank you.
Is that feedback coming from here? So should I just shout and not use the mic? That's okay? All right. I have a lot of questions, but I'll stick to a couple. Some of them are environmental, and Joe, you said that at a future date we could get a I think I talked loud enough.
It's just, I don't know if the camera will pick it up. That's.
It won't get on the tape.
No, it won't get on the tape. Nick, could you just grab one of these microphones, and maybe we'll have people come up to that corner, the corner over here, and speak when time comes. Sorry. Because we want to get everything on tape.
Does that
Thank
work?
you.
Is that good?
That's working.
Okay. So one quick question on the trust fund. On page 93 of the PSDR, it does say specifically that inflation is not taken into account. We're assuming that 2% growth. How could we not be assuming something for inflation as well?
I apologize if I misspoke on that. It does assume a 2% rate of return, very conservatively on that, so.
But inflation of costs, labor costs, as well as unforeseen things at the plant could increase costs. I mean, I've been in construction for quite a long time, and I know almost any major job that starts anticipates 10 to 20% override.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I will tell you this, the PSDA, I won't speak to their PSDAR, but the NRC rules talk about a 2% real rate of return, which means 2% above inflation.
So that's calculated in.
So to the extent that they're talking about a 2% real rate of return, they're talking about a 2% return above inflation.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. My main question has to do with transportation. I know everyone, of course, is concerned about the dry casks and if those were ever to be moved, but that is so far off that I'm more concerned about everything else that's getting transported. First of all, where you talk about transportation in the report, it refers to types of waste A, B, C, and greater than C. I'm sure that A, B, and C are from low to high, and greater than C, of course. And I'm sure none of greater than C does not include the dry casks, does it?
I'm not exactly clear. I can
Okay.
clarify that.
So at some point, I'd like, if we can get clarification on what those different grades of waste are. And a lot of those low-level waste materials, and there'll be a lot of material coming out of there. Some of it may not be radioactive at all. So I'm also concerned about the truck traffic. From the standpoint of the village resident, I would like to know what route that traffic is going to take, those trucks, what kind of vehicles, how much of those vehicles will be carrying those types of waste, and you know, and if we can get examples of what those waste are. You know, I'm sure there's probably natural stones that are comparable to type A waste, you know, that you could just pick up a stone and might have the same radioactivity as a type A waste. I'm not sure, I'm just conjecturing. But I think at some point I'd like to get a sense of what's coming out, what kind of vehicles, how many trucks, can we expect a truck a day, a truck a minute, and what route would it take? And you know, the report also says it's not expected to impact the condition of the roads at all, but I think we'd like to get a sense of what we're talking about before we can agree or disagree with that.
Understand.
And I'll hold some of the other questions for another time. That was my main question. Thanks.
Oh, where's, oh, Mr. Herschel.
Thank you, Herschel Spector here. Thank you for coming down. Two questions related to the funds. I think you made a very good argument that it's possible that you're going to exceed the 2%, which would be favorable. Would you be willing to modify the report, the PSDAR, to indicate that if there's any money left over, it goes to the ratepayers? One. And secondly, I noticed that the cost for decommissioning for Indian Point 3 is about $300 million more than Indian Point 2. But I don't understand why. They're sister plants, and looking at some of your tables, both of all the major tests start at the same date and end at the same date, or there's one that maybe Indian Point 2 is a little longer, so its cost might be somewhat higher. So I don't see the basis of having a $300 million difference, and I think that needs to be explained.
All right. Yes, sir. I'm sorry, I have to have everybody come up to the microphone, but our original intent was to pass the microphone around, but that didn't work.
That's fine. I'll hold it up and maybe easier.
If you could, you know what, everybody that speaks, if you could state your name this
Sure.
way. Thank you.
My name's Henry Kelly. I live down in Ossining. I'm downwind of the plant. And I read the 117 pages.
Wow.
In fact, I read it twice. And I've got a letter that I put together, and I'll take the 3 minutes, which you people said was cool. I think the country and American business are going through a soul-searching around the two crashes of the Boeing 737 MAX. A respected company, almost an American institution of excellence, became focused on marketing and profit rather than on the safety of their product. They actually suppressed internal warnings and concerns about the safety of their aircraft. In addition, they intentionally misled and manipulated the Federal Oversight Agency, the FAA. Safety, common sense, and honesty were compromised. 346 people died because of it. Boeing has lost a reputation and billions of dollars. My wife and I read the PSDAR report, as I said. We were both struck by the excruciating detailed cost charts, where phases and cost items were tracked by activity and durations across years, down to the last dollar. And you can look through here, and it's quite remarkable, all right? There are many pages of those charts. In marked contrast, there are only a few pages on the risk evaluation process on pages 93 to 95. Holtec talks evaluation process, but generically only, and not about actual risks. Radiological dangers, which are of most importance to the community, are only addressed in a short dismissive paragraph on page 31. Holtec seems content with thinking and saying that defueling lowers the likelihood of a radiological release, along with unspecified procedures to minimize releases. They even use the plural, releases. Perhaps an expectation unwittingly made. No release is acceptable, and all efforts are needed to avoid one. Accidents and damage are not prevented by a GE DCEIS document, the discussion of possible accidents in this entire document by Holtec is very minimal. Instead, the document falls back on referencing the NRC GEIS as if that document lowers concern. In fact, if you go and read that document, which you can find online, section 4.3.92 of the NUREG 0586 Supplement 1, it says that decommissioning increases the risk of accident since activity is significantly increased, raising accidental potential above usual normal plant operations. I think that's an important point. They said that. It does not lower it, as the PSDAR suggests. As two people living within 10 miles of Indian Point, this is completely unacceptable and alarming. It does not inspire confidence in the company or the plan. It appears that safety and contingency planning are glossed over, considered as just added cost percentages and possible schedule delays. The best way to avoid accidents is to first consider all the possibilities for them up front. You identify them and discuss them. You also consult with NRC and deliberate with local first responders and the community representatives. And this is a good first step tonight. And you get the message out to the public. You develop plans and means to avoid accidents happening. In so doing, you identify adequate responses and approaches in case a problem actually takes place. And you do that way ahead of any possible event. You can base training needs on this. Then you can fold this into the larger plan and costs. The responses and the associated resources, people, checklists, equipment, time and money become part of the work, part of the cost, part of the timeline, part of the plan. The level of detail is not in this PSDAR. It's just not there. Unfortunately, this reads like a sales presentation.
So,
The emphasis is clearly on Holtec, not on the safety of the community. This is not only insensitive, it shows a disregard that's upsetting. It shows a lack of concern in 117 pages in regard for the very element of the potential risks. That jeopardizes both the community and a successful decommissioning. It's a matter of your approach, I think. This NDCAP entity, as a first order of business, I think, should request from Holtec a thorough delineation of potential accident scenarios from the decommissioning. The risk to the public and site workers of the scenarios should be documented. Holtec should prepare methods of avoidance, notification, emergency response, and mitigation response documents to deal with the potential scenarios. It should share these with this NDCAP. We are dealing with possible impacts to the health and lives of thousands of men, women, and children living around this site. Those impacts are significantly more important and lasting than Holtec costs and profits. Human errors happen. People must understand. Equipment breaks. Multiple problems happen at the same time. Delays cause stress. Flawless execution is a presumptuous, potentially deadly assumption. Any plan that's cost must explore, face, and prepare for the unexpected. Thanks for the opportunity.
thank you. Thank you, sir. Would you like to leave that with us? Thank you so much. All right, great. Thank you.
I'd just like to make one comment, if I may, Mayor. While
Yes, absolutely.
Marilyn's coming up.
Okay.
I mentioned early on that January 9th, 2017, we heard from our governor and the CEO of Entergy. He's retired. We have new representatives from Entergy. But since that date, 3 years ago and a week now, we have not seen no return phone calls, no return emails, no return to my letters from the governor of New York State. I agree with him on many issues. This one, I do not. If I was governor, I never will be, I'm sure. I'd be down here just like our county executive, our assemblywoman, our state senator, our county legislators, all of you. He should come here and help us with funding and direction and safety.
Thank you, Linda. Good point. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, please. Yeah. Because this way it'll get on the film. 'cause if you
Sorry,
don't use it-
Marilyn, sorry.
Not a problem. Not a problem. I feel bad about turning my back to so many people. Can you hear me over there? Very good. My name is Marilyn Ellie. I live just a few miles from the plant, and I'm very glad to learn more about Holtec. I have two questions, one having to do with the interim spent fuel that, place that you were talking about. My understanding of the law is that there can be no interim spent fuel storage until there is a national plan and a national place to put the fuel, that the law precludes an interim place until we have a regular place to put that. It's also a matter of public record that the governor of New Mexico is very much opposed to having that fuel shipped into her state. So could you speak to that, please?
In terms of the New Mexico location, similar to the issue that Supervisor Puglisi echoed with the governor, we have a very strong relationship with the local community. The local community was the Eddie Lee Alliance was the one that put out an RFP requesting companies like Holtec to propose to build such a facility out there. So we have the local support to do that. We continue to have conversations with the governor's office out there and other key stakeholders on that project.
My question really has to do with federal law that precludes interim storage before we have a place for regular storage.
There are different pieces of legislation going through Congress right now that would allow for the ability to create interim storage, and that's something that we are, pressuring members of Congress across the nuclear industry for something like that. And again, something hopefully we can work with the local community to make that feasible so that something like that can happen.
Okay, so you are counting on pending legislation being passed?
That is one of the keys to make that facility possible.
Okay, thank you. Could you please speak to the court case in New Jersey in regard to Holtec, the bribery charges that were brought against Holtec? Could you please speak to that?
I'm not familiar with a court case that is specific to Holtec on that. If you're regarding the tax credits.
No, this was not tax credits. This was a bribery case because you were trying to build there, and local officials evidently took bribes, and Holtec evidently gave bribes. There was a court case. I was just wondering if you could expand on that.
I am not familiar with any court case in the state of New Jersey regarding bribery.
Okay, well, I can give you some information about that, and maybe you could get back to us.
Yeah, I can definitely do that.
Thank you.
Marilyn, I know what you're saying about the interim storage, but technically, there's already interim storage throughout the country on all the sites of the nuclear power plants. Unfortunately, but that's how it is.
Well, on-site storage is not interim storage, though.
Well, it was.
You can say what you want about it, but interim storage is moving the spent fuel pool, or the spent fuel rod, sorry,
Right.
to another location. That's interim storage.
But technically, that's what we're doing anyhow because it's here. Because it was never considered, this was never considered permanent or interim. This was supposed to be moved out by the Department of Energy. So I kind of look at it that we are an interim storage facility.
Well, you're certainly welcome to do that. That does not fit the requirements
Okay.
or the definition of interim
All right.
storage.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Diane Tangent, and I'm a Buchanan resident. I would like to know, you stated that you will be honoring the pilot program through 2024. How will you be compensating the local communities and our school district beyond that as owners of the Indian Point property? I live in Buchanan, and I own property, and I pay taxes.
That is something that we will look to have conversations with the municipalities as well as the school district moving forward. Again, we're not the owner, so we can't legally negotiate at this time, but that's something that has been mentioned to us as an area of concern as well as redevelopment. We understand those concerns as two key areas that we need to address immediately as soon as we can.
I'm sorry, can I just quickly follow up on her question, because I think maybe what Ms. Tangent is at is the plan to some level of assurance that should Holtec become the owners during the decommissioning process, that they will, even beyond the current pilot agreement, continue to work with the community to help with respect to the, to the economic impact of the
I
plant
do not
closure.
have the authority to make a formal, declaration like that, but that is something, I've had conversations with Mayor Knickerbocker. We have listened, we will continue to listen and, see what we can do on our end to support the community on that.
Thank you. My name's Courtney Williams. I'm a Peekskill resident. I live 1 mile from the plant, and I have 2 children in the Hendrick-Hudson School District. So I had a couple of questions. The first was, how many plants have you successfully decommissioned?
We are currently in the process of decommissioning Oyster Creek and Pilgrim, and our partner company has been involved in decommissioning projects at Zion, Big Rock Point, as I mentioned earlier, as well as internationally.
And your partner is SNC Lavalin?
That is correct.
That's the company that's got bribery problems in Canada, right?
I'm familiar with the media coverage.
And then my other question was, when Councilman Smith asked you about snafus that you've had, why did you limit it to 9 months and not mention the things that have gone wrong, like at San Onofre, where one of your canisters got stuck 18 feet off the ground and a whistleblower reported it, or how many of your casks, when they're loaded, wind up with scratches, so that shortens the lifespan of those? I'm just wondering why you chose 9 months.
We became owners and licensee holder of Oyster Creek and Pilgrim within that time period.
But you
The question was
conduct,
related
as a
to that.
contractor, you do this work all the time, right? You do various waste handling, nuclear waste handling at nuclear power plants across the country and in 133 countries?
Yes, we do.
Okay, and so have you had snafus at any of those, as a contractor for any of those with waste handling?
I am not aware. I've been with the company for 6 months. I'm not aware of any specific issue that jumps out at each and every plant. I'm not at that level of expertise
For the members
yet.
of the board, I have brought with me references and citations for all of the questions that I'm asking, because I know the answers to those questions. My other question, how many times is pipeline mentioned in your PSDAR? Answer is 0. How many pipelines cross the property at Indian Point Nuclear Power Plant?
I am learning this community. I am not familiar with the number of times different words are mentioned in the document.
The answer is 3 high-pressure gas transmission pipelines. Is your company aware that New York State conducted a risk assessment that said decommissioning activities will increase the risk to our community from a pipeline rupture?
You know what, I think in fairness to Joe, I'd like to have all your questions, and then we can answer
All
them.
right, I didn't just got
because-
one more. Why were you selected to come talk to us today if you don't have the answers to so many of our questions? That would be my final question.
Thank you. And you have the list of the questions?
But
Oh,
this is
okay.
citing answers to
Oh,
many of the
okay.
questions
All
that
right.
were unanswered
All right,
by
thank you.
Voltex.
But like we said, it's a living document, so there's a lot of things to be looked at.
Thank you to the people who have spoken so far. As an initial question, I would like to ask, can Holtex send somebody next time that knows something? Because as far as I can tell, none of the questions that we have answered, we have asked, have gotten a complete or sufficient answer. So that would be my preliminary question. I've been writing them down and writing down the answers, and it's usually, I don't know that level of detail. But I would like to ask a couple of other questions. They are both about the exemptive orders that Holtec routinely, and as far as I know, for every single plant that they are planning to decommission, has requested. One is to have no off-site emergency planning. That would mean, and the Attorney General of Massachusetts has raised very serious questions about that there might not even be a siren anymore. So if there were an accident during the decommissioning, which will be more dangerous than they are now, there won't be any sirens, there will not be any money going or training going to our great emergency responders here. And I think that that is not something that we as a community would like to really have happen here. I understand you will be having discussions about it, but I would like for, number one, for any request for an exemption to be withdrawn, and number two, to have in writing that you will not request that there will be no off-site emergency planning. If you look at the Pilgrim plant that is being decommissioned, it is not, the Attorney General of Massachusetts has objected to this very strenuously, as has Senator Markey. Number two of these exemptions, and these exemptions are asked for every time, and the NRC grants them every time, which is called regulation by exemption. This should be something that only happens in an unusual situation, which would not be every time a plant decommissions. The second exemption that you regularly ask for is to be able to use the Decommissioning Trust Fund for things that are not part of the laws about what is decommissioning. Waste management, moving the spent fuel out of the pools is not a legitimate cost of the decommissioning, nor is the oversight of hiring people, hiring lawyers, hiring accountants. That should be an expense that is paid by the company. But of course, none of the companies that you've set up to do this decommissioning have any capital other than the Decommissioning Trust Fund. You were saying that Holtec, I assume that's the parent company, Holtec International, not one of the many subsidiaries, that Holtec would put in extra money if it was needed, if you ran out of funds. I would like to see that in writing. I would like to see that in the PSDAR, along with the assurance that you would not change that particular item and that you would not ask for these exemptions, which you have already calculated into your cost. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. How many more people would like to speak? Okay.
Okay, I guess I will hold it.
Yes,
Is
I know
that
it's
better?
a little awkward. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Is that better? My name is Ellen Weininger. I'm a Westchester resident. I live in White Plains. Although it's southern Westchester, I have very serious concerns, and also I spend a good deal of my work time and personal time up here in the northern Westchester area, so that also brings me to this meeting as well. I do have a few questions. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to ask these questions and for this forum. Just to go back for a moment about the New York State agency's concerns about the potential for compromising pipeline integrity during excavation activities. I would like to know, will Holtec insist and indeed commit to advocating to Enbridge and to all the responsible federal and state agencies to call upon the gas flow to be stopped in those pipelines that cross the site, understanding that this is just a basic fundamental best practice when conducting excavation activities for any building project, that one would shut off a gas flow, understanding that there could be a potential for compromising the integrity of those pipelines. And will Holtec commit to refraining from proceeding with these excavation and decommissioning operations until there is clear safety measures and clearly has fully addressed this issue of stopping gas flow before any work proceeds? Can we count on that commitment from Holtec, and will Holtec join the community in advocating for this basic fundamental safety measure? Do we have those assurances from Holtec? And will Holtec insist on this very basic measure? So that's one question. And the other question I have is about radioactivity and about the radioactive decay. And what we know about radionuclides is they do decay, but we know what that means. That means that it doesn't just disappear or go away. It actually dissipates and continues to propagate. So, and migrate through soil and water and becomes airborne as well, very, very readily. So the question is, what specific site testing is being done as baseline? What kind of measurements? Who will do those measurements? And who will take into account these concerns about how radioactivity actually does behave in general and specific to this site, given the fact that there's equipment and buildings and also leaks that have formed a large reservoir underneath the site that is radioactive, and also the radioactive contaminants that have been issued out of the facility into the Hudson River. So if you can provide what provisions are being made for that. And I hope that the next time and going forward, that there is someone who can answer these questions very specifically, because I think that they are just really fundamental requirements of a project as serious and enormous and also as costly as it is to this community and to the surrounding communities. Everything's at stake. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think there's a few things that have to be understood. This is just the first blush. This was the introduction to the PSDAR. This is the beginning of a long process that we're going to be going through with the decommissioning. So some valid questions, some good comments were made. So we, and onward we go. All right.
Hi there. Thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to speak. My name is Tina Volz-Bongar. I live in Peekskill. I say I can see the plant from my attic, but I can really see it from my second floor in the winter when the leaves are off the trees. So anyway, I'd like to read really quickly through this letter dated yesterday that I sent to the Attorney General of New York State. And it reads, Jeremy Magliero, Lisa Buriak, Joshua Talent, in the New York State Office of the Attorney General Environmental Bureau. Mr. Magliero, Ms. Buriak, Mr. Talent, thank you again for meeting with us at the end of October regarding the dangers of the Algonquin gas transmission pipelines at Indian Point Nuclear Power Plant. In addition to discussing Enbridge's inability to shut off the gas of the Algonquin pipelines at Indian Point within 3 minutes from the notification of a rupture, as confirmed during the New York State Public Service Commission audit, we also covered regulatory concerns. These included the faulty risk analysis by Entergy and the lack of oversight by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, NRC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, PHMSA, Homeland Security, or any other federal agency for the location and security of the new 42-inch high-pressure gas pipeline and the older 26-inch and 30-inch pipelines running underneath Indian Point. We are writing with grave concern now about Holtec's post-shutdown decommissioning report, PSDAR. Nowhere in this document is there any mention of the pipelines, let alone any kind of mitigation of risks posed by decommissioning activities. Construction activity is one of the leading causes of pipeline rupture, and the risk of demolition during decommissioning must be addressed. Most notably, there is no reference to the risk assessment ordered by Governor Cuomo and commissioned by several New York State agencies on June 22nd, 2018. In a letter to FERC accompanying the executive summary of the risk analysis, these state agencies wrote, lastly, at some point after the IP Indian Point reactors cease generating electricity, decommissioning and decontamination work will begin at the IPEC site. NRC, sorry about that, must coordinate, at the NRC and FERC must coordinate a review of Entergy's decommissioning plan when filed to determine potential impacts to the original Algonquin pipelines and the AIM pipeline. Given the heavy excavator work that will be part of decommissioning, FERC may need to require Enbridge to temporarily cease gas operations during the decommissioning activities that may threaten the pipeline integrity. That's from the New York State Risk Assessment. Again, we appreciate your office's responsiveness to our concerns about the security and safety vulnerabilities of the pipelines and the need for oversight during decommissioning. While we understand that your office does not offer legal advice, we are hoping you may educate us on the law in this area and tell us which public official or agency has jurisdiction and authority to address our concerns. We are also copying our elected officials, grassroots organizations, and environmental groups that are stakeholders in this process. Tens of millions of people live in the relocation zone surrounding Indian Point nuclear power plant, including our families. The safety of our communities is paramount, and we will continue all efforts to ensure it. Thank you for your attention. We look forward to follow-up from your office. And this is sincerely myself, Courtney Williams, Marie and Sarah, and Amy Rosemarin from North Salem. And I've copied the Peekskill City Council, the Westchester County Executive and legislators, compliments of my legislator Colin Smith, and Sandy Galiff, Peter Harcum, CD17 Indivisible, Co-Hope Indivisible, Riverkeeper Clearwater, Indian Point Safe Energy Coalition, IPSC, Stop the Algonquin Pipeline Expansion, Sierra Club, Sane Energy Project, Sane Energy Rights Group, Energy Democracy Alliance, Grassroots Environmental Education, and the Federated Conservationists of Westchester, in case those organizations can give us any help with shutting down the gas during the decommissioning process. Thank you.
Do you have a copy of that you can, please?
I made 32 copies, so you wouldn't have to do that. So I saved you that time.
Thank you. Okay, yes, because the local officials did not get a copy of that, but we'll take it.
Do you want to give one to Judy for the minutes?
Yes, that'll be great. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So, I think it was a good meeting. I think there was a lot of information exchanged, a lot of comments made. So we will have several more citizens advisory panels. This is what this is about, communicating to the community what's going on with the decommissioning process. So the goal is the safe decommissioning of Indian Point.
Absolutely. And please don't forget the state and local task force meeting Thursday, January 30th, 7 p.m. at the Cortland Town Hall. You're all welcome to attend, to hear from the PSC, et cetera. And thank you all for being here. I think I echo what you say, Mayor. It was a good meeting.
Mm-hmm.
3 years of research, and now we're getting going on this subject. And I'm very hopeful that all those excellent questions that were raised will be answered at our next meeting. Thank you.
And most importantly, thank you to all of you for coming out and your interest in this process. Thank you and have a good night. Oh, and a motion to adjourn? Second? All in favor? Aye, thank you.